Hello everyone, I wanted to do a video on the subject of homemade transfers and decals. It's a subject I've spoken about before, almost sort of in passing in other videos, but I had a comment on my channel recently from a new subscriber, Zero Recon 16 I think his tag is, and he wanted to ask me a little bit more kind of detail how to go about it, because he's considering designing his own Warhammer 40k army, which is not a subject I know very much about, but I think I sort of understand what his intention is. It's probably to design the sort of crests and logos and things that go on the shoulder pads of the Marines and on the banners and such like. This isn't going to be a comprehensive guide to how to do it, and it's not even going to be a particularly slick or professional approach or presentation or anything like that. I tend to kind of muddle my way through these sort of things, and originally I started making my own transfers for my Wargames figures and so on, because some of the designs and so on that I wanted to reproduce, it was impossible to paint, and at the same time there weren't commercial decals available that I could use. So a good example of that would be this Tyra clan samurai from the Genpei Wars, which I have definitely shown you before, but just to remind you. And I didn't know what sort of design to put onto the banner. The sort of, it's not a sashimono, there's the banner here, but I decided I would put on the Tyra Mon or emblem on this figure, and then I'm also going to paint up eventually when I get around to it the Minamoto equivalent, which is some kind of flower. I've forgotten the name of the flower at the moment, but this is a particularly elaborate kind of butterfly, you know, something that far exceeds my ability to be able to paint. So I thought, well, what if I kind of print off an image and stick it on and onto the model, and that didn't really look particularly good. So then I thought it must be possible to make your own transfer and put that on, and found indeed that you can buy transfer decal paper that you can print your own designs and so on onto, and then print them off as transfers. So that's what we're going to talk about. But there are a lot of other uses. You could put I mean, for instance, here I've got some saga dice that I wanted to kind of not house rule, but create my own battle boards for some Wars of the Roses figures that I have, and sort of invent my own battle boards and have specific saga dice. So you can see one here, red for Lancaster, white for York, and I've noticed that when a lot of people do make their own saga dice, I mean, people are inclined to do it anyway, even for the official factions, because the dice are quite expensive. But very often what they'll do is simply print the facings onto paper and then glue the paper down to the dice. But in fact you can get a much nicer finish by putting them onto transfers and then gluing the transfers down. So what I did in this particular case was just to grab some free clip art off of the internet and print those out onto decal paper. So I've got things that I thought were vaguely medieval looking and appropriate. So there's a rose, there's the York equivalent, there's a crown, and there's a helmet, sort of vaguely medieval looking helmet. And you know, I think that's I've always been quite pleased with the effect on these, and you can see immediately on here the difference it makes in terms of using transparent decal paper, which I'm going to have to talk a lot about a little bit later. You can either print designs onto transparent decal paper or onto white, so that's clear decal paper, or onto white decal paper. But the problem you have if you print it onto white paper is that you then have to cut very closely to the actual design in order for there not to be a white surround around the design. Now that wouldn't have mattered so much if you're then transferring the decal to a white background such as this dice, but if you did it on a coloured background such as the Lancastrian dice is red, then you would end up with all of the edge of the transfer and the part that's inside the helmet would be white. So whereas there is sort of red that you're seeing through on parts of the helmet, that would be white, and it just wouldn't look right. And I can show you an example of what that looks like, because I haven't done a very good job on the emblem on the front of that Stuka there, which is printed onto a white background, and I think you can see where I sort of cut it as close as I could, but you can see the white surround on the emblem in front of the cockpit there. And if you do it clumsily, then it will show up even more. While I'm in passing, then most of the transfers on this model are commercial, the Balkan crosses and so on, including the Balkan cross there. But what I did do, this is another thing that you can do with transfers that you make yourself, is I actually typed some letters and numbers and then printed those out at the right size. So all those all that lettering there, I think all of it, most of it is stuff that I did myself. Now, the question might have occurred to you when I was showing you that emblem, is why not, if you're going to risk having that white outline, why not print it onto transparent decal paper and then put that on there? And the reason is that the minute you do that, you're also looking through the coloured areas. So that yellow would be almost hidden, because you would also see underneath it the dark green camouflage colour. So the yellow wouldn't have looked, it would have looked extremely subdued and almost invisible. It wouldn't have worked at all. So it's fine if you do that on a white background, because all you're getting through the background is white. So the red on this dice looks perfectly all right. But if I were to if that were yellow, say, it would look fine on a a white dice, but on a red dice it would be virtually invisible. So you have to be aware of the background color that you're putting it on. Usually the kind of way around that is to paint, if you really did want to do it, is to paint the model white, or give it an undercoat of white to begin with, then put the transfer on, and then paint around the transfer in the color, which in this case would be dark green, around it. So that would be a way around it, but that wouldn't solve the problem then of having to fill in all these sort of gaps in the inside. So you can ruin the effect. But anyway, what I want to do first of all, before I show you the process of how you actually print these things off and apply them, is just to give you a brief kind of look at the sort of various ways that you can obtain images or design your own images to put onto transfers. So I'm going to do that by filming from my laptop. Right, so obviously you're going to need to be able to grab an image or draw an image on screen, design your own image, or collect one off the internet or whatever, and you're going to need some kind of software in order to do that. Now I used to have some desktop publishing software and some graphics software, and as the years have gone by, the operating systems that I now have on my laptop don't support the software that I used to own, so it's now all obsolete. So I've kind of had to make do with various programs that are either free or that are not really designed specifically for graphics design and so on, and I've actually found PowerPoint to be quite versatile and useful. It's not designed to create really elaborate images or anything like that, but it's more for presentations and putting symbols and things. But you can paste into it photographs and pictures and so on, and annotate them differently and so on, so that it is usable. So this is the front screen of a blank design, so it hasn't got any of that sort of background themes or anything like that, and we just need to change the page so that all the pages, we're only going to use one page, so that's blank. And then let's take you to the internet, and I'll show you how I obtained that butterfly logo for the Tara clan. So all you have to do is go into Google and search for the Tara clan or the Tara family. Yeah, let's do Tara clan rather than family. Told you it wasn't going to be slick, didn't I? Right, there we go. And over here, there are the images. So let's look at all the images available. And this is the Wikipedia page. So all I'm going to do is copy that image and then go back to PowerPoint and paste it into PowerPoint. It's way too big. You're going to have to size this down a lot. and then what you would have to do is print that off on an ordinary piece of paper to begin with, just to see what kind of size that prints off as. Looks like let's print that off now just to get an idea. It's probably going to be, I'd guess, about 1.5 inches high, that kind of size. Yeah, more like 2 inches that came out. So clearly, if you wanted to put it on a banner, such as on that figure, it would have to be something like that kind of size, maybe even a little bit smaller. And this brings me, sorry about the background noise of my printer now, replenishing with ink. Can't avoid it. Yeah, this brings me another thing, that the decal paper is actually A4. So if you were just going to print that off on its own, I mean, it's incredible, you're going to waste the rest of the paper. So the best thing to do is to have lots of designs, you know, sort of printed onto one sheet, and prepare things a long time in advance. I mean, you could even, let's get you the equivalent of the Minamoto one as well. So this is the Minamoto design. Copy image again. I'm doing this in a bit of a hurry, and just to give you an idea. So you know, take your time with all these things, and play around, explore, and you know, just do what you're comfortable with doing. But as I say, really, in order to make use of the entire sheet of A4, you need to fill it with designs and so on, you know, letters, anything you want. Oh yeah, that gives me another thing I wanted to talk about. This is a site that easily found on the internet, where you can type in letters from any sort of the different alphabets, you know, Chinese, Arabic, Russian, whatever. So you might, for instance, want to print out a banner for the Russian Revolution, for your Russian Civil War figures, or even for the very British Civil War, I suppose, or something like that. So I think this says, my Russian's not that good nowadays, but I think this is, I've managed to spell it correctly, "Long live the revolution." So having typed that out, I can then copy it, and paste it into the PowerPoint presentation. Obviously, if it was something like 25mm, banner or something like that, I'd have to get this a lot smaller. Not entirely sure how I do that. Font size, maybe. No, it doesn't want to do that. But anyway, you get my point. You can grab it, play around with it, get it to the size you wanted, and then put it on your sheet to print out. other types of software you might have available on your computer. This is some software called Sketchbook. So this is another way of going about it and print and having something that you can print. So this is basically just the most recent version. That Microsoft used to have something called Paint, I think it was, or can't remember. But you can basically free draw anything you want onto that. You can type text in, but unlike PowerPoint, you're limited to these fonts. So there's nothing particularly foreign about any of these fonts, but you might just want to be making a transfer with something written on it, and you can use one of these fonts. But it hasn't got anything like Cyrillic or Greek or anything like that, so it's a little bit limited, but let's pick that one. Type that, and not quite sure how you paste it into that. Anyway, it's there. You know, this isn't really the subject of the video. So that's the message. And then you got Word as well. You can paste things into Word. That is earlier on I was messing around trying, because in Word you have symbol, and symbol allows you to get a lot of Greek letters. That's mainly because a lot of sort of formula and equations and so on use Greek symbols to represent various factors and so on. Enough of that. And then anyway, having got your having got your designs and images that you want to print, and you're happy that you're going to try, you've experimented in printing them out on ordinary paper, and that you've got them to the correct size and things, then is the time that you need to print them onto transfer paper. So I'm going to go back to the desk now. Right, so a couple of things I forgot to say when we were looking at the screen, and this applies especially if you're talking about Games Workshop, I suppose, is that a lot of images are copyright, and even grabbing them to make use of them on your models and so on is theoretically covered by copyright rules. And if you're designing your own Warhammer 40k faction, I suppose that's fine. But if you were to copy any of the official factions, I don't know what they are, but I'm just imagining now, then you could potentially get into trouble, especially if you then took those figures to a tournament or to to the games that are played in the Games Workshop shops in the town centres and so on. So you do need to be a little bit careful. And the other thing I forgot to show you was that there are lots of sites, specifically I'm thinking related to wargaming, where people design banners and shield designs and all kinds of things like that, and just offer them freely for you to download and use and print on your own transfers. And a particular example of that is a website called An Hour of Wolves and Shattered Shields. I'd recommend you going to that. He's got a lot of hand hand-drawn shield designs for Vikings, for instance. To my eye, they don't look particularly authentic, but you know, you might like them and want to make use of them. I think he's got a Bretonian designs for what was that? That used to be the old Warhammer Fantasy, I think, didn't it? Yeah, things like that. Anyway, but onto actually printing. Now, I was talking earlier about how you can either print onto white decal paper or clear decal paper. I haven't got much white left. I've only got one sheet left, and I'm not going to actually demonstrate this by printing onto it, I'm afraid. But I wanted to show you. Let's open this one. At first glance, there is nothing to distinguish between the two, so you're reliant on the labelling. But on the back, it is quite clearly shown that is inkjet paper, because my printer is an inkjet printer, and it's white. And this one here is inkjet, and it's clear. So I'm going to show you some remnants of pages that I printed out in the past, and then we'll put those onto various surfaces to show you the mistakes and so on that can happen. Now, the first thing is once I printed the transfer out, I always leave it a day. That's probably unnecessary. I always leave it a day in order for the ink to dry. And the reason for that is that before you can use these transfers, you have to varnish them. You have to put a coat of varnish on them in order to seal the ink in, because obviously you're going to be then immersing it in water, and when you do that the ink can run. But I found even applying the varnish a little bit liberally can result in the ink running a little bit, and I've got an example of that somewhere. I don't need those. Those are commercial transfers. Here we go. So these are actually off of, you know, the ones that I used for that Stuka that I showed you earlier, and I obviously had it kind of upright, vertical, and I was spraying it, and you can see that kind of red stain where the ink has run a little bit under the varnish. So you need to put it on kind of a little bit at a time. Put the varnish on a little bit at a time, and you know, don't sort of splash it all on, because it will just puddle and then the ink will run. And I'll show you. Oh yeah, that's one thing I didn't show you. First of all, I obtained this transfer paper from a company called Crafty Computer Paper, which is www.craftycomputerpaper.co.uk. But they also recommend a varnish. They'll sell you the varnish as well, and I wasn't terribly impressed by the varnish, but it did work. I'll just go and find that. No, sorry, I can't find it. I think I must have thrown the canister away. After about halfway through using it, having used about half the contents is what I mean. The nozzle kind of jammed up, and it was spluttering and all this kind of thing. So I'm sure any type of varnish will do, any sort of clear varnish will do, just to seal the ink in. Right, so I'm just going to get some water now and something to transfer some of these things on, just to show you the difference between white and clear. Okay, I should have said as well that you need to leave the varnish to dry. I usually leave it 24 hours as well before I put it into water. And I didn't say, the other thing I didn't really mention is that this paper, here's back to some of those Tyro and Minamoto emblems that I printed onto some clear paper, along with some yellow kanji that I was going to make some saga dice for some samurai factions I was thinking of doing as well. So I'm going to use this in my demonstrations, but I should have said as well that this paper is quite thick, so if you are applying it to a figure which has got lots of curves or lumps in it, it does tend to kind of it's pretty obvious that you've used a transfer. It doesn't cling to the surface very easily because it doesn't flex as much as a sort of thinner layer of transfer paper would do. So there are a lot of limitations to this, but sometimes if you want to print something like, if you want to put something like that on a figure, it's the only way of going about it. So let's get on with it. So I've got some cardboard here somewhere, which I'm going to use. This is just white card, and I couldn't find any black card, so we're going to have to make do with an old bus timetable. So this is a coloured surface that we're going to apply things to as well, and you'll be able to see the difference. So okay, so this is clear paper. I've got another one there that's printed on clear paper, so we're going to use this butterfly to begin with, just to show you what happens with that. Not going to cut too closely, but obviously you would want to get as close to the image as you could, for that very reason, that the paper is very thick and it stands sort of proud of the surface that you put it on, so that if the light catches it, it's really obvious that it's a transfer and that you didn't paint it yourself. Okay, let's do this one as well. For some reason this one painted out a lot darker. Don't know why. Maybe I'll change the colour or something. This is a slightly darker image, but it will give you an idea. Okay, so I'm just going to let those soak in water for a minute so that they come free, and then we'll put one on the dark and one on the white. This one seems to be running, so I bet I didn't varnish this one. Yeah, I probably never got around to varnishing it, and I've just ruined it anyway by... so we'll have to find another one. Okay, let's go with this one to begin with. Right, so I'm just going to make a right hash of this, but slide this off. Okay, and somewhere down here, yeah, I've got another one here. So again, this is on clear paper. So if I varnish this one, right, so that's moving, so it's just... Right, there we go, that proves that quite dramatically. So when you put it on a white background, you can see colours red as it should be, and you can see all the white dots and circles and lines and so on the design. If you put the same transfer onto a darker or coloured background, the background colour shows through, really hides the colour. It's turned it into a kind of murky, sort of purplish kind of colour, and what should be white, the white dots, are the background colour now. So that's a very kind of easy mistake to make. You just have to be aware that you should always apply clear transfers onto a white background, and then if the background of the figure isn't white, then you have to paint round the edges. So obviously with a very kind of convoluted shape, you have to be quite careful about how you paint to the edge as well. Okay, now what I'm going to do is show you what happens. So I'm going to use these images here, and these are on white paper. So these are those badges from the Stuka cockpit that I showed you. So I've got a few of those that I'm obviously never going to need again. So I can afford to spare those two. And this is white paper now. Remember, just managed to lift off the. hadn't attached to the paper very well. Okay. Now what is actually going to happen with this? This is white paper, and the whole of that paper is going to come away with the transfer. Well, obviously it did with those as well, but it's clear, so you could see through it. So I haven't cut to the edge of the badge very carefully at all. And this one's now moving, and you see the whole thing lifts away. So if you put it then on a coloured background, the yellow colour and everything shows up perfectly well. If that had been a transparent one, you would have had that same effect, and the yellow would have been hidden. But the entire piece of paper shows up. It's not clear, so it's white, so it obviously shows up, and it's very apparent that I haven't cut to the edge. Whereas if you're putting it onto a white piece of paper, it's still obvious that there's a white background there, because the white of the transfer and the white of the paper is slightly different, but doesn't show up half as badly. But the colour is just the same. The yellow colours and the blues and so on are exactly the same. So that is the sort of pitfalls that you have to try and avoid. Hopefully that's been a little bit of help to you. I mean, once you get into this. The number of applications you can put it to are immense. I mean, it doesn't even have to be wargaming. You know, people put their designs onto their coffee mugs, for instance, although I'm not sure I would trust these things in sort of washing up. I'm sure they would come away, but you know what I'm saying. You can put them onto items of furniture, all kinds of things. Not just just as I put them on those dice, and I thought it worked really well on the dice. I've even made little tattoos and put them onto figures. So things like if you wanted to put a really elaborate circular spiraling design for a Dark Age warrior or something like that, as long as you cut it out quite carefully, painted the flesh colour onto an arm, the muscle of an arm or chest, and then put it on transparent paper, cut it out quite carefully and stuck it down, it would look really good, I think, except that you have to be careful to put it to a relatively flat surface and not have it curving around the fold of an arm or, you know, the bend of an elbow or something like that, because then the transfer wouldn't, you know, sort of stick to the kind of surface very well, and it would lift off a little bit and be obvious that it was a transfer and that you hadn't painted it. But it's a way of doing difficult, you know, sort of paint jobs a little bit more easily. And if you take your time with it, I mean, I've rushed all this and done it very haphazardly, but I think that shows you the kind of you know, the mistakes you might make, but also the effects that you can get. Let's just give you one last look at that. Samurai figure. So I don't think that's bad at all. It's a bit difficult to see in the light, but I think that came out pretty well, and it's not something that I would ever be able to paint. And you know, on a tabletop you can't even make out that it's a transfer tool when you're looking at it from a distance. Okay, so hope that helps, and see you again on the next video. Bye for now.